Welcome, dear readers, to a journey into the chilling depths of the human psyche, where the oath to heal can be twisted into a sinister pact with darkness. Before we delve into this harrowing tale of betrayal and terror, I extend a heartfelt invitation. If this story captivates you, if the suspense grips your imagination, and if you wish to explore more narratives that push the boundaries of human experience, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Your support is the lifeblood of our creative endeavors, allowing us to bring more compelling and thought-provoking stories to life. Now, brace yourselves, as we peel back the sterile facade of medicine to reveal the darkness within. The gleaming, sterile halls of St. Jude's Medical Center in Boston hummed with the ceaseless rhythm of life and imminent death. Within this intricate ecosystem of hope and despair, Dr. Elias Thorne reigned supreme. A brilliant neurosurgeon, his hands were rumored to possess an almost divine precision, his intellect sharp as any scalpel, his reputation unblemished. He was the kind of doctor whispered about in reverent tones, the one patients prayed for, the one who performed miracles where others saw only futility. Elias, in his late 40s, possessed the classic, chiseled features often associated with screen heroes: a strong jawline, piercing blue eyes that conveyed both intense focus and a practiced empathy, and a shock of prematurely silver hair that added an aura of distinguished wisdom. He moved with an effortless grace, his surgical scrubs always immaculate, his presence radiating an undeniable authority. He was the undisputed star of St. Jude's neurosurgery department, and he knew it. Yet, beneath this polished exterior, a different kind of ambition festered. Elias craved more than mere professional acclaim. He yearned for a legacy that would echo through generations, a contribution to medical science so profound it would rewrite textbooks. His current obsession was a revolutionary neurostimulator he had been developing in secret for years, designed to regenerate damaged neural pathways in the brain. If successful, it could cure everything from advanced Alzheimer's to catastrophic spinal cord injuries. It was, in his mind, the ultimate answer to human suffering, the ultimate key to immortality. The problem, however, was the funding. The research required astronomical sums, far beyond what St. Jude's or any conventional grant committee was willing to risk on an unproven, highly experimental device. His colleagues, while admiring his intellect, viewed his theories as bordering on the fantastical, his ambitions as overly zealous. Dr. Evelyn Reed, his former mentor and now the head of the neurosurgery department, often warned him, "Elias, innovation is vital, but so is caution. There's a fine line between genius and delusion." Elias dismissed their skepticism as the short-sightedness of lesser minds. They couldn't see what he saw: the potential, the future, the godlike power this device could bestow. He truly believed he was on the cusp of a breakthrough that would redefine medicine. All he needed was more capital, more resources, and, most importantly, more data. His private laboratory, located in the basement of his expansive, secluded home on the outskirts of Boston, was a testament to his obsession. It was state-of-the-art, a labyrinth of gleaming machinery, complex wiring, and countless petri dishes. Here, he conducted his clandestine animal trials, meticulously documenting every twitch, every neurological response. The results were promising, tantalizingly close to what he envisioned, but human trials were still a distant, almost insurmountable hurdle. One particularly frustrating evening, after a major grant application was rejected, Elias sat alone in his lab, staring at the complex schematic of his neurostimulator. The weight of his unfulfilled ambition pressed down on him. He had dedicated his entire adult life, sacrificed personal relationships, forsaken a normal existence, all for this. To fail now was unthinkable. It was then, in the suffocating silence of his frustration, that a dark, insidious idea began to take root. A whispered suggestion in the depths of his exhausted mind. He needed human subjects, but not just any subjects. He needed patients with specific neurological conditions, patients who had exhausted all conventional treatments, patients who were, in the eyes of the medical establishment, beyond hope. Patients whose disappearance might not raise too many immediate alarms, or whose deaths could be easily attributed to their pre-existing conditions. The thought was monstrous, a complete violation of his Hippocratic oath. a betrayal of everything he stood for as a doctor. He recoiled, repulsed by his own contemplation. He was a healer, a lifesaver, not a monster. Yet, the idea persisted, twisting and turning in his mind, finding cracks in his moral facade. What if, he rationalized, these experimental procedures, even if unethical by current standards, ultimately led to a cure that saved millions? What if a few sacrifices now meant a healthier future for all humanity? The ends, he began to convince himself, justified the means. His ambition, once noble, began its descent into the abyss of delusion. His first subject was almost a test, a horrifying experiment in his own capacity for darkness. Mr. Arthur Jenkins, an elderly man admitted to St. Jude's with advanced Parkinson's disease, was a perfect candidate. His tremors were severe, his quality of life drastically diminished, and his family had reluctantly accepted that he had very little time left. Elias had been consulting on Mr. Jenkins' case. He saw the despair in the man's eyes, the quiet resignation of his family. He approached the family with a practiced tenderness, explaining the grim prognosis, subtly hinting at experimental, cutting-edge research that, while unproven, offered a flicker of hope. He presented it as a last resort, a compassionate gesture in the face of inevitable decline. The family, desperate, signed the consent forms, their gratitude a bitter taste in Elias's mouth. Under the guise of transporting Mr. Jenkins to an off-site research facility, for this experimental treatment, a facility that existed only in Elias's fabricated narrative, he brought the old man to his private lab. The transformation from compassionate doctor to calculating predator was swift and chilling. He sedated Mr. Jenkins, his hands, usually so gentle, now moved with a cold surgical efficiency as he prepared for the procedure. He connected Mr. Jenkins to his neurostimulator, a complex web of electrodes and wires. He carefully monitored the old man's brain activity, injecting varying frequencies, meticulously recording every minute change. The procedure itself was a brutal violation, a surgical assault on a helpless, unconscious man. The initial results were, in a twisted sense, exhilarating. He observed flashes of neural regeneration, brief moments where the damaged pathways flickered back to life. But the old man's body, already ravaged by disease, couldn't withstand the intense neural stimulation. Mr. Jenkins succumbed to a massive cerebral hemorrhage on the operating table. Elias felt a pang of something akin to disappointment, but not remorse. The death was a complication, a failure of the device, not a human being. He meticulously cleaned the lab, disposed of Mr. Jenkins' body in a remote, wooded area, and fabricated a medical report attributing his death to natural causes and complications of his Parkinson's, stating he had passed away peacefully at the off-site facility. The hospital, already prepared for Mr. Jenkins' demise, accepted the report without question. The experience, while ending in death, provided invaluable data. Elias refined his device, adjusted the frequencies, and believed he understood the limits of its application. He felt a perverse validation. He was closer. He was learning. He was becoming a pioneer, albeit one steeped in blood. The success of his deception emboldened him. He realized the vast potential of St. Jude's, a constant supply of desperate, vulnerable patients, each a potential subject for his gruesome research. He began to meticulously select his victims, focusing on those with no immediate family or those whose families lived far away, making inquiries and follow-ups less likely. He targeted patients with severe, chronic pain, terminal illnesses, or degenerative neurological conditions, whose deaths could be easily explained. His next victim was a young woman, Sarah Miller, suffering from an aggressive form of glioblastoma. Her prognosis was grim, her family had exhausted all options, and her pain was excruciating. Elias presented the experimental treatment as a chance to alleviate her suffering, to give her a few more months of quality life. Her family, blinded by hope, readily agreed. Sarah's procedure was another macabre dance in Elias's private lab. He monitored her responses with scientific detachment, meticulously recording the data, the subtle shifts in her brain activity. She too eventually succumbed, her body unable to withstand the trauma. But the data, Elias convinced himself, was invaluable. He felt a growing sense of power, a terrifying exhilaration in his ability to manipulate life and death, all in the name of his grand vision. The disappearances and unexplained deaths, initially dismissed as unfortunate but understandable medical occurrences, began to accumulate, forming a subtle, almost invisible pattern. Elias, the brilliant, compassionate Dr. Thorne, moved through the hospital halls, a respected figure, while a hidden darkness pulsed beneath his pristine facade. He was building his legacy, one victim at a time, each life a stepping stone towards his ultimate, terrifying medical breakthrough. The surgeon's shadow had truly begun its reign of terror. The chilling pattern of disappearances and suspicious deaths at St. Jude's, initially dismissed as isolated incidents, began to slowly, inexorably, coalesce into something more sinister. Detective Mark Anderson, a seasoned homicide detective with the Boston Police Department, found himself increasingly drawn to the seemingly disparate cases. He wasn't assigned to them directly, as they were initially categorized as natural deaths or missing persons, but something about them gnawed at him. Anderson was a man of quiet intensity, his face etched with years of witnessing humanity's darkest corners. He possessed a keen eye for detail and an almost intuitive sense for when something was fundamentally wrong. He noticed the recurring mention of Dr. Elias Thorne in patient files, the brilliant neurosurgeon who had consulted on several of these cases, always providing a reassuring prognosis or offering last-ditch experimental treatments that inevitably led to the patient's peaceful passing or disappearance. His initial inquiries were met with polite dismissals from the hospital administration. St. Jude's prided itself on its impeccable reputation, and the suggestion of anything untoward was met with a wall of professional decorum. Dr. Evelyn Reed, head of neurosurgery, a woman of sharp intellect and unwavering ethics, was particularly defensive of Elias, whom she considered a protégé, albeit a sometimes reckless one. Detective Anderson, Dr. Reed had stated firmly in her office, her gaze unwavering, "Dr. Thorne is one of the finest surgeons in the country. His patients are often in the most critical of conditions. Unfortunately, in our line of work, death is sometimes an unavoidable outcome." Anderson respected Dr. Reed, but her unwavering faith in Elias felt almost blind. He began to dig deeper off the books, using his contacts in the medical examiner's office and subtle inquiries with nurses and junior staff at St. Jude's. He found that while Dr. Thorne's official record was spotless, there were whispers of his intense ambition, his single-minded pursuit of a revolutionary neurostimulator, and his increasing secrecy surrounding his research. Meanwhile, Elias, oblivious to the subtle tightening of the investigative net, was consumed by his work. The data he was collecting, though acquired through horrific means, was yielding unprecedented results. He was refining his neurostimulator, understanding the delicate balance between stimulation and fatal overdose. He was convinced he was on the verge of a breakthrough, a monumental achievement that would eventually justify every unethical step he had taken. His victims were now chosen with even greater precision. He sought out individuals whose lives, in his twisted view, held less societal value, making their absence less impactful. He targeted homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, and patients with severe mental illnesses from state institutions, whom he arranged to be temporarily transferred to St. Jude's under fabricated research protocols. These individuals were often isolated, their voices unheard, their disappearances easily lost in the bureaucratic labyrinth. He created intricate, fabricated medical histories for them, justifying their presence at St. Jude's and providing plausible explanations for their eventual deaths or disappearances. He became a master manipulator, weaving a complex web of lies that, for a time, appeared seamless. One of his new subjects was a young, undocumented woman named Elena, who had arrived at St. Jude's with severe head trauma after a hit-and-run accident. She was comatose, without family in the U.S., and her prognosis was dire. Elias saw in her not a dying woman, but a pristine canvas for his next set of experiments. He convinced the hospital to keep her on life support, citing a fabricated, obscure neurological condition that required specialized, long-term observation. Elena's body, resilient and young, responded differently to his treatments. He observed unprecedented neural regeneration, flashes of activity in areas of her brain that should have been irrevocably damaged. He was elated, a twisted God witnessing his creation. But as her brain began to heal, a new problem emerged. Elena began to show signs of regaining consciousness. This was a terrifying development. A conscious subject, one who could remember, who could identify him, would unravel everything. Elias found himself in a horrifying dilemma. To continue his research, he needed her alive and unconscious. To ensure her silence, he needed her dead. His solution was as chilling as it was calculated. He began to administer a slow-acting neurotoxin, carefully titrating the dosage to keep her in a persistent vegetative state, just enough to maintain her unconscious status while still allowing him to observe the long-term effects of his stimulator. He was no longer just experimenting with regeneration. He was actively managing her death, prolonging it for his scientific curiosity. Back at the police department, Anderson's unofficial investigation intensified. He had developed a rudimentary timeline of Elias's cases, noticing a chilling correlation between Elias's experimental treatments and the subsequent vanishing or death of patients, particularly those who were vulnerable or isolated. He also noticed a peculiar detail. The bodies, when recovered, often showed subtle, almost imperceptible surgical scarring around the temporal lobe, consistent with cranial surgery, yet these procedures were often not listed in their official medical records. He brought his findings to his superior, Captain Davies, a gruff but fair man who had initially dismissed Anderson's hunches. "Mark, you're chasing ghosts. Thorne is a respected doctor. This is St. Jude's, not some back-alley clinic." "Captain," Anderson countered, laying out a meticulously compiled spreadsheet of dates, names, and medical discrepancies. "The pattern is too consistent. The victims are too convenient. And these subtle cranial incisions, they're not always in the file. Something is profoundly wrong." Davies, though still skeptical, was swayed by the sheer volume of Anderson's meticulously gathered data. He gave Anderson the green light for a discreet, official investigation, stressing the need for absolute secrecy due to Elias's high profile. Anderson's first move was to obtain a warrant for Mr. Jenkins' body, which had been quickly cremated after his death. However, he managed to secure access to preserved tissue samples from the autopsy, which, upon re-examination, revealed traces of highly specialized, experimental neurostimulant compounds that were not approved for human use and were not present in any conventional medication. This was the first concrete piece of evidence, a shocking revelation. Next, he focused on Sarah Miller. Her family, still grieving, expressed their initial gratitude for Dr. Thorne's compassion, but then shared a disturbing detail. They had never actually visited the off-site research facility. All communication had been through Elias, and the cremation had been handled quickly, through a service recommended by him. Anderson secured a warrant to exhume Sarah's remains, an emotionally taxing process for her family. The autopsy confirmed similar, unrecorded cranial surgery and the presence of the same experimental compounds. The evidence against Elias began to mount, piece by agonizing piece. Anderson discovered a shell corporation registered to a P.O. box, used to funnel funds for his private lab and purchase specialized equipment, all under a falsified name. He traced unusual power consumption to Elias's secluded home, far exceeding what a normal residence would require, consistent with a high-tech laboratory. Dr. Reed, initially dismissive, began to grow uneasy. She noticed subtle changes in Elias. His increasing secretiveness, his evasiveness when questioned about his research, the dark circles under his eyes, and a disturbing, almost predatory gleam that occasionally flashed in his usually empathetic gaze. She also became aware of Anderson's discreet inquiries and the growing unease among some of the nursing staff. Her faith in her protégé began to waver, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The final, crucial piece of the puzzle came from a junior nurse, Maria, who had worked closely with Elias. She had been tasked with preparing Elena, the undocumented woman in a persistent vegetative state, for a transfer to another hospital, a transfer that, she later learned, was a fabrication. Maria, a compassionate and observant woman, had noticed a strange, almost imperceptible rhythmic hum coming from Elena's room on several occasions, even when no official medical equipment was present. She also recalled Elias insisting on administering certain medications to Elena himself, often in isolation. Maria, increasingly disturbed by these anomalies, had discreetly kept a personal log of Elena's vital signs and Elias's unusual requests. She had also, out of a gut feeling, taken a small, unlabeled vial from Elias's personal medical bag, which he had accidentally left in Elena's room after one of his treatments. She had simply intended to return it, but something stopped her. It was a clear, viscous liquid, unlike anything she had ever seen. Overwhelmed by her growing suspicions and Anderson's persistent but careful inquiries, Maria finally approached Dr. Reed, trembling as she presented her log and the mysterious vial. Dr. Reed, her face pale with shock, immediately recognized the gravity of the information. She sent the vial for an urgent, confidential analysis. The results were devastating. It contained a potent neurotoxin, perfectly capable of inducing and maintaining a vegetative state. With the evidence now irrefutable, Dr. Reed's world shattered. The man she had mentored, the doctor she had so fiercely defended, was a monster. She contacted Anderson immediately, her voice strained with grief and horror. The next morning, armed with search warrants and overwhelming evidence, a full task force led by Detective Anderson descended upon St. Jude's Medical Center. Elias Thorne, preparing for a routine surgery, was apprehended in the surgeon's lounge, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. He looked at Dr. Reed, who stood silently beside Anderson, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and steel. He knew then that his carefully constructed world had imploded. But the final, most terrifying discovery awaited them at Elias's secluded home. The basement laboratory, meticulously maintained and filled with cutting-edge equipment, was a scene of medical horror. And there, strapped to a sophisticated operating table, connected to Elias's infamous neurostimulator, was Elena, her body a testament to his prolonged, torturous experimentation. She was alive, but barely, a living ghost, a victim of the surgeon's twisted ambition. The threads had unraveled, exposing the chilling reality of Dr. Elias Thorne. The world would soon learn the terrifying truth behind the surgeon's shadow. The arrest of Dr. Elias Thorne sent shockwaves not only through Boston but across the entire medical community in America. The news cycles were dominated by the St. Jude's butcher, the surgeon of shadows, and the doctor who played God. The meticulously crafted image of the brilliant, compassionate neurosurgeon shattered, replaced by the chilling reality of a calculating, remorseless serial killer. Detective Mark Anderson, hailed as a hero, meticulously prepared the case for trial, working tirelessly with the district attorney's office. Dr. Evelyn Reed, her reputation tarnished by her initial defense of Elias, became a key witness, her testimony a heartbreaking account of betrayed trust and professional shock. Maria, the junior nurse, bravely recounted her observations and the crucial discovery of the neurotoxin vial. The prosecution presented an overwhelming body of evidence. The exhumed bodies showing unrecorded cranial surgeries and experimental compounds, the meticulous patient logs from Elias's private lab, the shell corporation used for funding, and the horrific discovery of Elena, barely clinging to life, a living testament to his depravity. Forensic experts detailed the specific neurotoxins and the precise, torturous methods Elias had used to maintain his victims in a vegetative state for his experiments. The trial of Elias Thorne became a national spectacle. Every day, the courtroom was packed with media, victims' families, and morbidly curious onlookers. Elias, once so composed, now sat in the defendant's chair, his face gaunt, his piercing blue eyes still holding a strange, unsettling glint, a mix of defiance, resentment, and perhaps a lingering belief in the nobility of his intentions. His defense team, well-funded and highly skilled, argued for insanity. They painted a picture of a brilliant mind pushed to its limits by the immense pressure of scientific ambition, a man who genuinely believed his heinous acts were for the greater good of humanity. They presented expert psychological testimony, arguing that Elias suffered from a severe form of narcissistic personality disorder coupled with a messianic complex, leading him to believe he was above conventional ethics and laws. During his own testimony, Elias spoke with a chilling detachment, his voice calm and precise. He described his neurostimulator, its potential to cure debilitating diseases, his vision for a future free from neurological suffering. He spoke of his subjects not as victims, but as necessary sacrifices for a scientific breakthrough. "I was on the verge," he stated, his eyes sweeping across the jury, "of unlocking the secrets of the brain. These were not murders, but contributions, necessary data points on the path to saving millions." The courtroom gasped. The victims' families wept openly. His words, delivered with such cold conviction, served only to reinforce the prosecution's argument. This was not a man driven by madness alone, but by a profound and dangerous arrogance, a complete absence of empathy. Elena, miraculously, survived. After months of intensive care, her body began to slowly recover, but her brain, ravaged by the prolonged neurotoxin exposure and the experimental stimulations, was permanently damaged. She remained in a persistent vegetative state, a tragic ghost in her own body, a constant, silent witness to Elias's monstrous acts. Her survival, however, allowed the prosecution to introduce chilling medical records from Elias's lab, detailing her gradual decline and his deliberate actions to maintain her state, thus proving not only murder but also prolonged torture. The jury, after weeks of harrowing testimony and overwhelming evidence, reached a verdict: guilty on all counts, including multiple counts of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and illegal human experimentation. The judge, visibly shaken by the details of the case, sentenced Elias Thorne to consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Justice, swift and absolute, had been served. In the aftermath, St. Jude's Medical Center faced intense scrutiny and public outrage. Internal investigations led to sweeping changes in patient care protocols, ethics oversight, and the monitoring of experimental treatments. Dr. Evelyn Reed, though exonerated from direct involvement, retired from her position, haunted by the betrayal. The hospital's reputation, once pristine, bore a permanent scar. Detective Anderson, while relieved by the conviction, found himself wrestling with the profound darkness he had uncovered. The case left an indelible mark on him, a stark reminder of the evil that could lurk beneath the most respectable facades. He often visited Elena in the long-term care facility, a quiet observer, a silent witness to the enduring consequences of Elias's ambition. Elias Thorne, stripped of his medical license, his reputation shattered, spent his remaining days in a maximum security prison. He was a pariah universally condemned. Yet, even behind bars, he clung to his twisted belief system. He would often fill notebooks with complex equations and schematics for his neurostimulator, convinced that the world, in its short-sightedness, had denied humanity its greatest medical breakthrough. He believed he was a martyr, a misunderstood genius whose sacrifices would one day be recognized. The surgeon's shadow became a cautionary tale, a horrifying benchmark in the annals of medical ethics. The name Dr. Elias Thorne, once synonymous with brilliance and healing, now evoked only terror and betrayal. His ambition, once soaring to the heights of scientific discovery, had plunged into the deepest abyss of human depravity, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and a chilling reminder that even in the pursuit of immortality, some lines must never be crossed. The sterile halls of St. Jude's would forever echo with the whispers of his victims, a haunting testament to the doctor who sought to play God, and in doing so, became a monster.